Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, a candid conversation with New York Times bestselling author Judy L. Mandel. Judy's new memoir, White Flag, is a personal and poignant account of her niece Cheryl's struggles with addiction and tragic death. It's also a recounting of her own futile attempts to intervene and to ultimately come to terms with her inability to save Cheryl or to find satisfactory answers to the most haunting of questions: why? The book also highlights the more universal epidemic of addiction and the unique factors that can make treatment difficult given the individualized manifestations of dependency. Judy is a former reporter and marketing executive who recently earned an MFA from Stony Brook University. In addition to books, she also writes essays and articles. Her first memoir, Replacement Child, recounts the devastation of a plane crash that killed her eldest sister and left her other sister, Cheryl's mother, with lifelong physical and emotional scars. It's a story that, along with White Flag, shows the effects of transgenerational trauma stemming from shared tragedy. Readers are finding resonance with White Flag's powerful and relatable narrative, which contrasts life's horrors with hope for a brighter future. Beloved and best-selling author Judy Blume noted, "We rarely know the deeper ramifications of tragedy through people's lives. White Flag shows us the true story of how the same tragedy I drew from in For the Unlikely Event spiraled through her family, giving a glimpse of the way trauma can be felt for generations." Now, Judy L. Mandel shares her family's story in the hopes that it will illuminate the complex nature of addiction and shared trauma. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. Today, I am speaking with New York Times bestselling author Judy L. Mandel, whose new memoir, White Flag, is available right now from Legacy Book Press. Welcome to the show, Judy.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. So we
Yes.
met many years ago when your first book came out, and I just have to say to you, and I hope that I said this to you then, but you write very poignant, powerful memoirs, and I just have to say that when I read your work, I always find myself really admiring how truthful and vulnerable you allow yourself to be on the page. So I just wanted to say that publicly, if I have not said that before, because I think that's something that a lot of us aspire to, and you've done it beautifully
Well,
again.
thank you. Thank you for that. That's a big compliment. I
Sure.
appreciate it.
Of course. And so obviously, White Flag is a very personal book to you, and people will get a sense of that rather quickly. But I did want to start with asking you about the opening chapter of White Flag, where you write about rediscovering your niece Cheryl, actually through a picture you find of her on the internet. So I'm wondering if you can tell us what led you to search for her, and then how this moment marked the beginning of this deeply personal journey that you share with us in the book, White Flag.
Well, as I write in the book, it's almost like I felt like my sister had passed away, and that was Cheryl's mother. It sounds a little bit eerie, but I almost felt like she was telling me to look for her. And when I had looked for her before, I couldn't find her.
Right.
And I think there were new things up on the internet that let you look at mugshots, and that they had public releases of these things that they didn't have previously. And so when I did find her, I knew I had to do something, because there she was, and she was all alone, and she was, as I say, still mine.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I did mention your previous book, which was Replacement Child, and that too is another memoir. And these books are actually, sort of very complementary of one another, or you can consider them almost companion pieces, though you do provide a lot of context in White Flag so that people who haven't read Replacement Child will grasp that. But I'm wondering, given the theme of trauma in this book and the potential ripple effects throughout generations, which is, I believe, called transgenerational trauma, that would make sense. I'm wondering if you can talk about, that trauma that you really explored in depth in your first book, and then how, that impacted not only your sister Linda, but Cheryl, your niece, and you as well, so that people can sort of grasp that concept of the ripple effects of trauma throughout generations.
Sure, sure. And what we're talking about in Replacement Child is a plane crash. So there was, before my birth, a plane crash that killed my older sister, and then badly injured Linda, who was 2 years old at the time, and who almost died from that plane crash as well. She is the mother of Cheryl, who I write about in White Flag. So you can see there's definitely a thread line right through, one book to the other. And really what happened when I was researching for White Flag, um, I started to go down that path of generational trauma, transgenerational trauma. I know they're called sometimes different things. And I found, some of the research that was done with different generations of Holocaust victims and their families, found that there were things that were still came through in, generation after generation. So, up to like 3 generations past. And so that made me want to start looking at that more. Like, what does that mean? How does that happen? How is that? Is it, genetic? Is it, what is it? And and I'm not a scientist, so I want you to understand, I'm not a scientist. So this is what I have understood is that stress plays a big part on your body, and especially, even in utero when you're pregnant and you have a baby, and there are hormones. Cortisol is one of the hormones that in stress or trauma, um, you'll have more of that. And when the fetus is bathed in this cortisol, it has an effect on them. It affects every portion of their body and their brain. And it does, make a difference. So I think of my mother, who had just lost her daughter and had a very badly injured other daughter she was taking care of, and was pregnant with me, right after that, very soon after that, and still in grief. And so, I realized that definitely must have played a part in my genetic disposition. Um, that's obviously true. Um, I have an autoimmune disease. Also, I have Crohn's disease. So
Right.
that's, I started thinking, it probably had an effect on everything. And it made me also think about Cheryl and her mother, who, from the age of 2 went through trauma after trauma after trauma in her life. All medical traumas with surgeries and reconstruction, and, being in the hospital, which I write about more in Replacement Child. Um, but also, not just the physical, but, social. She had visible scars, and she had a tough way, in her life. And I started to realize that there's no way that, her daughter wasn't affected by that. So, the transgenerational piece started to mean a great deal to me in this story.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and I think it's one of those topics where, for the longest time, we didn't realize that the impact, of one event on somebody else, maybe of another generation, could have those ripple effects. And it's like, the more you hear about something, the more you learn, and we're finally, maybe appreciating that, even though it manifests itself in so many different ways. And I did want to ask you about, your journey, you're endeavoring to really understand Cheryl because she struggled with addiction, ultimately, unfortunately, passed due to that. And when she was, struggling with that addiction, she would remove herself, from the family. She didn't want people to see her struggling with that. And so she would kind of disappear and reappear. And it was a cycle that would continue. So not only were you trying to, understand Cheryl as you found her again, but then you also had to sort of understand the very nature of addiction, which, as you mentioned, is shrouded in secrecy, shame, lots of misunderstanding. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about how you delved into that topic and what your process was like to try to understand it, and what were the big takeaways for you in going deep into addiction and addictive personalities.
A lot of reading helped me a great deal with that. I'm going to mention a couple of names that you probably, people that look into addiction have heard of Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, who actually has a new book out. But his book, In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost, really taught me a lot about addiction. He's worked with addicts for decades, um, and talking to other people who are involved with treating addicts and people that are in recovery, and people that are going through it. I went to some meetings that they allowed me to go to for Al-Anon. Actually, I went to, and then I also went to another. It's called GRASP. It's uh, recovery after substance death is what it is. So many parents were at that meeting, but I realized that everybody asks the same questions. What happened, and why did they turn to drugs? Why couldn't they stop? I know they wanted to stop. They told me that they made steps, and this is the same with Cheryl. They made steps to stop. They why could so and so son recover and mine couldn't? It's the same questions over and over again. And there has been, I think, a movement to maybe get away from the tough love piece of dealing with an addicted person, with a substance abuse person, because sometimes hitting bottom is maybe death, if you want to let them hit bottom. So what I've really realized is that you have to meet them where they are. I do wish I had known more when Cheryl was going through this, and understood more, and understood that, yes, they'll be lying and stealing and cheating and everything else. But to look at them as if they're not that substance use disorder. They're not their addiction. They're more than that. They're still that person that you love. And, meet them where they are, make sure they stay alive until they're ready to raise their white flag and say, I need help. I want to do this. That's, I think, critical. It's a critical piece.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned something that I actually wanted to ask you about was the idea that, we are not our addictions are not us. They maybe become a part of us. And I wanted to ask you, what is it that you want people to know and to remember about Cheryl before and beyond she struggled with addiction? Cheryl, the person, would you mind sharing a bit of her with us?
Sure, sure. She was fun. Really, and she was always reading books. She was, always had a book in her hand, and she was very loving. She took care of her grandparents when they needed it, when she was well, and she had a very big heart, and she was a good person. She was a good soul.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that because,
Yeah,
I think so often we lose the humanity
yeah,
within the addiction, and then we need that reminder. And I did want to expand
yeah.
on the idea of addiction for a minute too, because, and you mentioned this, addiction is not sort of a one size fits all outfit, is for a long time people sort of perceived it to be. So I'm wondering if you can tell us, and you mentioned some already, but what are some of the potential causes or triggers of different types of addiction? But then too, how can this complicate treatment given the very individualized nature of addiction as we now know it?
Sure, sure. Um, as I, said, it's complex, and it's different for everyone. Um, Recently there have been treatments called dual diagnosis treatments for substance use disorders, so that realizing that there may be depression involved, there may be bipolar involved, and this is why they are medicating themselves, basically, and to treat just the addiction or the substance use without delving into the reason why it started to happen, I think is the mistake that has been made in the past, that just dealing with the result, basically, of the complex problem that's going on. I mean, I know in Cheryl's case she had depression that was undiagnosed, untreated, and I think when after she got out of prison, I don't think she was able to get the medication to treat it. So that was another issue. So you have to look at what led to this. If someone has any kind of mental illness and they're not being treated for it, they may try to treat themselves. They probably will, because they're in pain and they're looking for comfort and a way not to feel that pain.
And it really does give you an understanding of how complex, the problem is, and it does make treatment difficult because we all know that unfortunately there's never enough resources, to treat things like addiction, and we're sort of looking for that band-aid or that cure-all, and it's not, because it's really dependent on the person and what the person needs and what they're going to respond to, which unfortunately a lot of times is really hard to provide, but it's almost like the whole system, needs an overhaul. And you read a book like this, and then you understand that much better than you probably would otherwise.
It does need an overhaul. And, I'm going to mention another book that just came out, Raising Lazarus. Beth Macy just has this book out. She's the one who wrote Dope Sick.
Right.
And she talks about harm reduction. And, if you read that, you'll see that it maybe people don't need to be in a residential rehab. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But what they do need is medically assisted treatment, and they need counseling, and they need social services to help them get their life back. They need all of this. And to make, the treatment easier to get than the drugs is, I think, the goal. And I think the government has to make some changes.
Yeah,
We
I
have to
would.
stop arresting people and not treating them,
Right.
I think.
No, I would certainly agree with that. And, it's interesting. I found myself thinking about my own background. For a long time, I worked in human services, and it wasn't, for people who are addicted. It was actually a program for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And our big thing was, personalized planning so that everybody had something that was tailor made to them. And the problem I found throughout the years there was that, it started that way, and as the government was coming down with mandates and resources became tighter and tighter, it almost felt like we were constantly taking those choices away, and it almost felt like a complete regression. And I sort of, see similarities with some of the agencies that you were talking about, in that there needs to be, personalized options, but the reality is that there's not the funding, the training, the staffing, the money. It's
Yep.
not there.
Well, there should be some money coming out of the settlements from Purdue, and
Yeah, right.
hopefully some of that money will go towards making treatment more available, and making social services more available. And I hope so. I
Yeah,
hope.
I mean, at least we have hope. I think at least now that we're realizing that, there are things
Right.
that need to be fixed. You can't fix what you don't know is,
And harm
good enough.
reduction, they're finding that needle exchanges lead to more people looking for treatment. It's
Right,
just a way to connect, and you
right.
keep them alive until they can come for help.
Sure. And I think again, that's a reason why, a book like this is so important, because it opens our eyes, especially, for some of us who don't have that hands-on intimate experience. We have preconceived notions, but you read something like this and then you sort of get a much fuller picture. But anyway, I did want to ask you, about the process that you went through after Cheryl actually passed, because you decided really to walk in her shoes. You visited the people, the places, the programs where she spent her final days, or the people she spent her final days with. And I'm
Mm.
wondering if you can tell us why that was important for you to do, and what you gained from the experience of actually going and doing that.
Sure. I don't know why I was pulled to do that. I just knew I had to go and walk through the park where she was found, and go to the shelter where she spent her last days, talk to the people at another, counseling area, that the Jewish Family Services Center that she had gone to a couple of times, and talk to them and see what they had seen. I have to say, this is a little bit weird, but I had gone to see a play up in Massachusetts, and during the play, one of the characters is killed, and his mother comes to in prison. He's killed in prison. His mother comes to the prison and makes them show her where he died, and where he laid, and how he laid there, and she lays there with where he was, and she won't get up. And I thought, well, that's it. You have to see what it was. You have to be where it was. And
Sure.
I think that's what led me to go to Kentucky, and walk through that park, especially, see that I had coordinates where she was found. And it happened to be right next to a dog park, which made perfect sense because she used to have dogs, and I'm sure she wanted to watch the dogs if she had a moment, of rest there. And I just wanted to actually sit on that bench. I actually laid down on the bench to see what it was like that, she might have seen her last minutes. And and if she had been given Narcan at the scene, I believe she would have recovered, but she was not. I think they may have given it to her when they got her into the ambulance, but it was too late.
Right.
Too late. So I think that. So does that answer? I don't know if I answered your question, but that's
No.
what led me to do it. That's what led me to do it, and there was a little bit of comfort doing it. Um, probably as a writer, an old reporter person, I wanted to get all the facts, and I
Right.
wanted, you know, I wanted to see, and I wanted to talk to people, and I wanted to,
Of course.
see the real thing. The
Sure.
shelter where she was, I found, had a lot more services that I had not heard of from her. I don't think she was really taking advantage of those. They it was a Salvation Army, and they really did have lots of things to help people.
Right. And one of the interesting things, that you show us throughout the book is, in her final months, Cheryl really was sort of living two lives because you were in pretty much constant communication, whether it was, phone calls, text messaging. And so you got, one notion of how she was living her life. And then you saw the other side of that story, and it just really makes you see how easily, we can be duped into believing one thing when something else, might be very much true. So I'm sure actually going there and experiencing, that for yourself. I mean, I can't even imagine what a profound experience that was for you. But again, it's just interesting to see. We can think, that somebody's doing well because they're showing us what we want to see. And then we realize that maybe that wasn't necessarily the case. And I wanted to ask you, about your own white flag, because you mentioned a bit earlier, that some people like Cheryl, unfortunately, never reach that point of being able to, wave their white flag and say, all right, something just has to change. This is it. It's either live or die. Now is that moment. But I'm sure for you, there was a white flag moment as well. I'm wondering if you can tell us about that.
It's definitely, threefold for the title of this book. I first thought about it because that's how she got a bed at the Salvation Army when the weather got very cold. They say they raise a white flag. It used to be a real white flag, like a literal white flag. Now it's digital, but they say anybody can come in
Right.
to save them. And then there was Cheryl, and that of her waving her white flag, but mine was surrendering to I couldn't save her. I couldn't have done it. I There were too many things that I didn't know, and that I couldn't do for her. And so that's really my white flag. And I think compiling all the evidence, kind of the complexity of what I was up against, helped me to say I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it.
Right. And that was
I-
actually
my surrender.
right. And I was going to ask you, about that because you've said that you sort of make sense, of the world around you through your writing, and that's how you process experiences, maybe answer questions that you have that don't have simple explanations. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us how working through these experiences in this book, really helped you to process the tragedy of Cheryl's death, but also the legacy of her life, and then, coming to that white flag moment where you yourself could realize, despite any sense of guilt, that there really was nothing that you personally could do to save her beyond what you had done.
I think, I started out looking at her letters that we had written each other, and there's only really a few of them in the book, but there were a lot of them, and looking through and seeing, the thread of what were we talking about, what were we not talking about, what books did I send her, what were they the right ones? I wasn't sure if they were I still am not sure if they were the right ones, but she was, an avid reader, and I thought it helped her get through the days. Um, so, putting that's how I started, was looking at her words and then looking at her journal. and seeing, how she used that journal to, mostly to just keep notes about her daily, what she was doing and where she was going, and, doctors and, codes and, things that you need. And the the big aha moment was when I found I could when I had her cell phone, and I unearthed her text messages during that period of time, that last month, which was the crucial part, and saw, as you said, saw that there were text messages, 1 minute to me, oh, I have 3 job interviews tomorrow, and, the next one is, meeting somebody at White Castle to pick up drugs. And, I mean, within 5 or 10 minutes of each other. And
Right.
so that opened my eyes to what I was up against, what was really going on in her life, and that I didn't know about. So I only had partial information in
Sure.
that way. And I only had partial information, as you see in the book, about a lot of things
Right.
in my
Right.
family, and, the silence that nobody talks about things. And the silence is kind of another trauma for a family. Um, so working those things out, you know, on top of understanding generational trauma, transgenerational trauma, and how that works, depression, and, all of these pieces put together, it just accumulated in a massive wall that I was not able to, get over. And I think that's when I finally realized I was, first of all, ill-equipped,
Mm.
and secondly, there was too much for me to, personally do to save her.
Absolutely. I mean, it's sort of such a complex puzzle, and there seems to be always
Yeah.
more pieces, so it's never quite complete.
Right,
Um,
right.
And I have to say, I really loved that you included in the book, some of the letters and diary entries of Cheryl's, because you really get to, as a reader who wasn't privileged enough to know her in life as a person, I felt like, all right, this is her voice. This is her personality, which is really coming through. And, we get to see the dynamics of the relationship that you reestablished with her. So I think that that really humanized and personalized the book for me, and it's a nice contrast to some of the more medically oriented facts that you'll find in the book. So just wanted to say that I really enjoyed that you allowed us to see those aspects of her that we might
Good.
otherwise not have.
Yeah, I wanted to get her in there, she was funny. She was even funny while she was in prison,
Yeah, I mean,
writing
if
to
you can
me,
laugh
you know?
then,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
I'm writing with a golf pencil. I don't know how I can do this. They took away my pen, so I have to write with this golf pencil. Those kinds of crazy things she talked about.
Sure. But I think it's, legacy and testament to who she is, and that will always live on because it's been immortalized. And that's, a nice gift that you, I think, were able to give to her. And I did want to sort of move into broader territory just for a bit, if you don't mind, and then I
Yeah,
will let you get back to life. But I did want to ask you specifically about memoir because, it's something that I know a lot of people are really drawn to, but at the same point, they avoid because they're afraid that they might be telling a story that's not entirely their own. And so I think that there are so many reasons to not do it versus giving yourself permission to go there. So I'm wondering, given your experiences, because you've done this a few times now and given us very truthful books, how do you measure candor with discretion? And then what guidance might you offer for people who feel compelled to do it, but just haven't taken that first step yet as to how they can maybe work through their own issues, their own trauma on the page, whether or not it's for a public audience?
yeah. It's funny. I taught a few workshops about memoir, and that's always the question that comes up. I don't think I can write this because so and so is going to be mad, or they're going to have a different view of it, and I'm afraid that they're going to. So I think it's just write your truth. Write what is true to you. And that's all you really know anyway. And that's all that the other person would know. And don't even think about what would happen later. Nothing might happen with whatever you're writing. That's how I started this journey with both of these books, thinking maybe nobody will ever read this. I might even not even publish this. Let me just work through it. Let me just write
Right.
what's true for me, and piece by piece, piece by piece.
Sure. No, I think that's good counsel because so many of us say, well, not right now, but someday. And if I've learned anything in life, it's that someday may never come.
No,
So,
no. So don't worry about whatever anybody's going to say.
right.
Just write
And
what's true for you.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you too, and you already, mentioned that your background is in journalism and as a reporter. And that's sort of all about getting the facts, get your story, present it as clearly and concisely as you can. But in most journalism, the idea is to take yourself and your emotions out of the story. Whereas in memoir, you're very much a part of that, as are your experiences, as are your emotions. So I'm just wondering if you can talk about the process, coming from that background as a reporter and then writing things that still get the facts, but that are also very much personal to you. Can you tell us about that evolution?
Well, sure. And when I was only a reporter for a short time, so I'll tell you that. And then I moved into public relations and marketing. So that was like a different way, different kind of writing too. But and when I was a reporter, I focused on feature writing, which had more to do with the personality of the people,
Sure.
and which is more up my alley. So that's how I kind of got around that. Um, Going from the facts to the internal part, I started reading things that were meaningful to me, and books that meant a lot to me, and a lot of them were memoir. A lot of them were, what's really in this person's mind, this really happened. I love fiction, but when something is real, and it has impacted somebody in a way that they're writing about it, that meant a lot to me, and so I wanted to do the same.
Yeah, well, you do it beautifully. I mean, I have to say that this book is not an easy read. It's very heavy subject matter, but I found myself, I started it one night and finished it the next day because it's very profound. And I think that you make a very personal connection to it as the best writing does. And I did want to mention too that you're actually donating a portion of your proceeds from the sales of this book to the Magnolia New Beginnings Inc. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about the organization and why it is that you have found that they are worthy of that support.
Well, after Cheryl passed away, I looked for different organizations. This one happens to be one that originated in Massachusetts. And I looked a person up. Her name is Maureen, and or Maureen Kavanaugh. And I called her, and she answered the phone. It was
It's a good
amazing.
start.
And she talked to me for like an hour on the phone, somebody she didn't even know, about you know having an addicted loved one, and what you can and can't do, and also how her organization works with families that are looking for help for their loved one at the moment, and they are right there with them, helping them find treatment, and the process and what to do. And that's the reason that I decided to support them.
Sure, it's a great cause, and I love that you're, using this book to support that. Um, so I did want to ask you too. I mean, obviously, you have impressive credentials. You now have two books, to your name. You are a New York Times bestselling author. You were a journalist for a period of time, and yet recently, you went to school and you earned yourself an MFA in creative writing. Because you just need a little more work in your life, right?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can tell us, what compelled you to do that, and how has that process, do you think, influenced or enhanced the writing that you do?
Oh, I think it really helped me with my writing. It started out, I went to a writers conference in Southampton. It's the Stony Brook writers conference. And I found I just really liked all the people, and I loved talking to everybody. And, I really liked the classes I was taking, and I looked into it, and I figured I could probably, get a degree
And
and
you
learn
did.
and learn a lot and learn a lot. And I did. I learned a great deal from that program. It was a very good program. So
That's, that's great. And I love that, no matter what you've experienced, there's always more to learn if you're open to it.
yeah, definitely.
But I was just tired reading that. I'm like, oh, Judy, you're doing it. And I'm tired for you, Judy. So two more questions, and then I will let you pack because you are going out on book tour.
Okay.
Uh, but I always ask, there are people who tend to tune in who are looking for some guidance or words of wisdom in terms of living a creative or a writing life. So I'm going to ask you, upon reflection, what do you think is the best advice that you were ever given, again, in terms of a writing or creative life? And then the flip side of that, what is the best advice that you were never given and had to learn for yourself throughout the process of actually doing the work?
Wow, those are good questions. I think that the one really good piece of advice, if you want to write something, is you really have to sit down and write it. you, have to,
True.
you have to get a schedule, and you have to do it. If you're working on a project, you have to do it every day. Pick the time of day that's best for you, that your brain is the clearest, that you're working your best. Set aside a goal, whether it's in the hours or the words, however you like, and stick to it. I think they always say put your butt in the seat is
Right.
the I think that's definitely the best advice that I've gotten. The other side of that is that you have to sometimes let it rest, and you have to step away from it sometimes, but you have to know when that time is right, and so that you can clear your head and go back to look at it with clear eyes. And I think that's the other side of it that I had to learn myself. That
That's
part.
excellent advice because so many people, you want it to be done, you want it to be out in the world, but you also want it to be as best as it can be, and you might not realize what that is until a bit later.
And
Excellent
sometimes
advice.
you can't rush it. Sometimes it
Right.
can't be rushed. So
Otherwise, you have regrets, and then you say, "Oh, I shouldn't have rushed it. Should have listened to you."
that's right.
Oh
That's
my gosh. So, final question for you. And I don't know if this is a fair question because I know that you tend to write, a bit slower because you're writing about real experiences and there's sort of a lot to sit with and to learn from. But I'm wondering, if you have any inklings of what might be the next story or book for you, if there's anything percolating right now.
I don't have anything right now. I really like writing essays. I just wrote one that's going to be in a new magazine, Zibby magazine
Nice.
in Long Island. So there's I have an essay coming out, and I think I'd like to write maybe shorter things, short stories. I'd like to
Sure.
do more of that. I've had a few of those published, but I'd like to do more of that.
That's excellent. Well, Judy, it was,
Shorter. I'm getting older. I have to do shorter things.
I like that.
Can't
Shorter
take
is
4 years to write another book.
Well, there you go. Write a book and then mix it up. Write some essays, a few short stories.
Yeah.
You know, I love it. You do it all. I admire that, and I really admire this book. You have to pick it up. White Flag. You will learn a lot. It's I think one of those really important books for people to read and to experience, because even if you think that you're not going to relate to this book, I bet you that you will find that you do. So Judy Mandel, White Flag is the new book. Thank you so much for being here and
Oh,
sharing that
thank you so
story.
much, John. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.